I never believed in fate until I started noticing the sourdough. That sounds ridiculous, I know, but let me explain. Every Saturday morning for 6 months, I'd walk into Crumb and Crust Bakery at exactly 9:15, and every single Saturday there would be one sourdough loaf left on the shelf. Just one. The good kind too, with that perfect golden crust that crackles when you press it, the kind that's usually sold out by 8:30. I thought I was just lucky. Turns out I was completely wrong about what was actually happening. My name is Adrian, and I'm a freelance graphic designer, which is a fancy way of saying I work from home in my pyjamas and have conversations with my cat more often than I'd like to admit. The bakery became part of my Saturday ritual about 6 months ago when I moved to this neighbourhood in Portland. New apartment, new start, all that optimistic stuff people tell themselves when they're running from a life that wasn't quite working out. I'd left a relationship that had slowly suffocated both of us, moved across town, and decided I needed to become the kind of person who appreciates artisan bread. It seemed like a good place to start rebuilding. The first time I walked into Crumb and Crust, I was immediately hit by that smell. You know the one. Yeast and butter and something caramelizing. That warm bread smell that makes you feel like you've walked into someone's grandmother's kitchen. The place was small, just a long wooden counter with a glass case displaying whatever hadn't sold yet. Exposed brick walls covered in chalkboard paint listing the day's offerings, and flour dust hanging in the air like it was part of the atmosphere. Behind the counter was a guy about my age, maybe late 20s, with dark curly hair pulled back in a bun, flour streaked across his forearms, and these incredibly focused brown eyes as he carefully arranged croissants in the display case. He looked up when the bell chimed, and I swear something shifted in my chest. Not love at first sight or anything that dramatic, just this awareness, like my body had noticed something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. He smiled, this easy, genuine smile, and said good morning in a voice that was deeper than I expected, warm like the bakery itself. I mumbled something back, suddenly awkward, and pretended to study the chalkboard menu very intently, even though I'd already decided I wanted sourdough. When I finally ordered, he nodded and reached for the last loaf on the shelf, wrapping it carefully in brown paper with this concentrated expression, like it mattered that he do it right. His hands were strong and precise, dusted with flour, and I found myself watching them longer than was probably normal. That was Felix. I didn't learn his name until the 3rd week, when I finally noticed the small chalkboard behind the register that said, "Today's Baker Felix." I tested the name silently in my mind, and it fit him somehow. Felix. Happy. Fortunate. The Latin root meaning lucky. I remembered that from high school, one of the few things that stuck from Mr. Morrison's class. I kept coming back every Saturday. It became the thing I looked forward to all week, which should have been my first clue that something was different about this. I'd tell myself it was about the bread, about supporting local businesses, about getting out of my apartment, all very reasonable explanations, but I'd spend a weird amount of time on Friday nights thinking about what shirt I'd wear, whether I needed a haircut, if I should try that new cologne my sister gave me for my birthday. And every Saturday, there was always one sourdough loaf left. Always. Even when I came earlier or later, there it was. Felix would see me walk in, and this little smile would cross his face before he caught himself and schooled his expression back to professional friendliness. We'd have these brief exchanges. "How's your week been?" "Good. Busy, you know how it is. This weather, right?" "Yeah, can't complain." "That bread I got last week was incredible." "Thanks. I tried a longer fermentation time. Small talk, surface level stuff, but I started noticing things. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled for real versus the customer service smile he gave everyone else. How he'd bite his lower lip slightly when he was concentrating on writing the price on the paper bag. The small scar above his left eyebrow that I wanted to ask about but never found the courage. How his hands moved with such confidence and care, like everything he touched mattered. I started noticing how my whole body felt more awake when I was in that bakery, how colours seemed brighter, how I'd replay our 30-second conversations in my mind for the rest of the day, like some kind of pathetic highlight reel. This went on for months. Summer turned to fall, and I'd watch him through the window sometimes as I approached, seeing him pull trays from the oven or knead dough with his whole body behind the movement, and I'd feel this ache I didn't want to name. I'd dated women in college, had that relationship with Michelle that ended when I moved, but there had always been this thing I couldn't quite access, this distance I couldn't explain. With her, I'd felt affectionate, comfortable, But never this. Never this awareness that made my skin feel too sensitive, never this want that sat in my chest like something alive. I wasn't stupid. I knew what it meant, but knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are very different things. I'd lie in bed at night thinking about Felix's hands, his smile, the way he said my name once he learned it, Adrian, like he was tasting it, and I'd feel terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. I was 28 years old and finally understanding something fundamental about myself, and it was because of a baker who saved me bread. One Saturday in October, I walked in and Felix wasn't there. A woman I'd seen before, maybe the owner, was behind the counter instead. My disappointment was physical, actually painful. I ordered my sourdough and she gave me this knowing look as she wrapped it up that made me want to disappear into the floor. As I was leaving, she said, "Felix is in the kitchen if you want to say hi," and I nearly dropped the bread. I mumbled something about not wanting to bother him and practically ran out of there, my face burning. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how obvious I must be, how she'd seen right through me, how pathetic it was to have a crush on someone I barely knew. Except it didn't feel like barely knowing him. It felt like I'd been studying for a test I didn't realize I was taking, learning everything I could from minimal information. I knew he worked Tuesdays through Saturdays. I knew he preferred savory to sweet based on the one time I saw him eating lunch. I knew he was left-handed. I knew his laugh, which I'd only heard twice, was slightly higher than his speaking voice and completely unself-conscious. I knew the way he looked at his baked goods with this critical eye, never quite satisfied, always seeing room for improvement. I knew I was falling for him, and I didn't know what to do about it. The next Saturday, I almost didn't go. I stood in my apartment at 8:45 in the morning having a full crisis about bread, about whether I was reading too much into things, about whether I was ready to acknowledge what this meant about who I was. My cat, Hemingway, sat on the windowsill judging me with his green eyes. "You're being ridiculous," his expression clearly said. "It's just a bakery. Just go get your bread." But it wasn't just bread anymore, and we both knew it. I went. Of course I went. And when I walked in at 9:20, late because of my existential crisis, Felix looked up with this expression of relief that made my heart stop. "Oh good, I was worried you weren't coming," he said, and then seemed to realize what he'd admitted because his eyes went wide and he busied himself with something behind the counter. "There's your loaf," he added, gesturing to the shelf where my sourdough waited like always. Something bold moved through me. Maybe desperation, maybe just exhaustion from months of this. "Do you save it for me?" I asked. The words hung in the air between us. Felix froze, his back to me, and I watched his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. When he turned around, his expression was vulnerable, in a way I'd never seen. All that careful professional distance gone. "Yeah," he said quietly, "every Saturday. I started doing it after the third week you came in. You seemed so happy when there was sourdough left, and I just wanted to make sure there always was. The bakery was empty except for us." Morning light came through the front window, illuminating the flour dust in the air. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the weight of this moment, the way everything was about to change. "Why?" I managed to ask, even though I thought I knew, even though I was terrified of being wrong. Felix smiled, sad and hopeful at the same time. "Come on, Adrian, you're a smart guy." "Why do you think?" I didn't have words. I just stood there, holding his gaze, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something vast. He came around the counter, stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could smell flour and cinnamon and something underneath that was just him. "I've been trying to work up the courage to ask you out for 4 months," he said. "Every Saturday you come in and we have these 30-second conversations, and I go to the kitchen afterward and bang my head against the wall because I'm such a coward. Literally. Ask Marcus. He's witnessed it. I save you bread like some kind of Victorian suitor leaving calling cards because I don't know how else to show you that I notice you, that I think about you all week, that every Saturday is the best day of my week because of 9:15 when you walk through that door." My breath had forgotten how to work. "You think about me?" He laughed, running a hand over his face. "Adrian, I've thought about almost nothing but you for 6 months. The way you smell the bread before you leave like you're already excited to eat it. How you always have paint or ink on your hands like you've been creating something. That thing you do where you bite your thumbnail when you're trying to decide if you want to try something new or stick with the sourdough. You always choose sourdough. I started developing new sourdough variations, just hoping you might want to try them. This was real. This was happening. This beautiful man was standing in his bakery telling me he'd been feeling the same impossible things I'd been feeling, and I had a choice to make about who I was going to be. The safe version of myself who thanked him for the bread and left and never came back, or the version who was brave enough to reach for what he wanted. I've never done this before, I said. The admission felt huge. Not just asking someone out. I mean, I've never been with a guy. I've never even admitted to anyone that I wanted to. I didn't really admit it to myself until you. You and your stupid, perfect sourdough. Felix's expression softened. That's a lot, he said. I don't want to pressure you into anything you're not ready for. But here's what I realized standing there. I was ready. Maybe not for everything. Maybe not to have it all figured out, but ready to try. Ready to see where this could go with someone who noticed me, who thought about me, who saved me bread for 6 months like he was saving a place for me in his life. Can I take you to dinner? I asked. The words came out steadier than I felt. Not tonight, because I need a few days to have a complete nervous breakdown about this, but soon, maybe next Friday. His smile could have powered the entire city. I would really like that, he said. Fair warning though, I'm going to judge every bread basket they bring to the table. I laughed, and it felt like something unlocking in my chest. I expect nothing less. We stood there grinning at each other like idiots until the bell chimed and another customer came in. Felix squeezed my hand quickly before returning to the counter, and I left with my sourdough and a date, and this fizzing feeling in my veins like champagne. That week was the longest of my life. I told my sister first, calling her on Tuesday night after drinking 2 beers for courage. I'm going on a date on Friday, I said. With a guy, the baker I told you about. There was a pause, and then she said, Adrian, I've known you were gay since you were 15 and got weird about that lifeguard at the community pool. I'm just glad you finally figured it out. Come over tomorrow. We're talking about this properly. Her acceptance made me cry, which I didn't expect. We talked for 3 hours about everything I'd been holding in, all the confusion and fear and self-doubt. She listened and hugged me and told me she loved me exactly as I was, and I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in years. Friday came. I changed my shirt 4 times and texted Felix twice to make sure we were still on, which he patiently confirmed both times. We met at a small Italian place in his neighbourhood, and seeing him in regular clothes instead of his work attire was almost too much. Dark jeans, a green button-down that made his eyes look even warmer, his hair down and curling around his shoulders. He looked nervous too, which helped. Dinner was easy in a way I didn't expect. We talked about everything, how he'd gotten into baking after dropping out of law school, realising he'd been pursuing what his parents wanted instead of what made him happy. How I'd struggled in my relationship with Michelle, knowing something was off but not understanding what. How we'd both noticed each other that very first day. He told me he'd nearly burned a batch of croissants that morning because he was distracted watching me through the kitchen door. I told him I'd walked past the bakery 3 times before working up the courage to go in. We talked about coming out, about the fear and freedom of it. Felix had known since high school, had been out for 10 years, and he was patient with my questions and uncertainties. He didn't make me feel inexperienced or late to the party. He just made me feel seen. After dinner, we walked through his neighbourhood, past closed shops and under streetlights, and our hands kept brushing accidentally on purpose, until finally I just grabbed his. His fingers laced through mine, warm and sure, and I felt like I was glowing from the inside out. "Is this okay?" he asked, and I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. We ended up sitting on a bench in a small park, talking until nearly midnight. At some point he reached up and tucked my hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my jaw, and said, "I really want to kiss you, but only if you want that too." I answered by closing the distance between us, pressing my lips to his, and it was nothing like kissing Michelle or the few other women I'd dated. It was electric and right and terrifying and perfect. His hand cupped the back of my neck, my fingers gripped his shirt, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. "Okay," I said. "Okay, that was worth waiting 28 years for." He laughed against my mouth. "Just wait until you try my chocolate babka." We dated through the fall and into winter. He taught me to bake, standing behind me in his apartment kitchen, his hands over mine as we kneaded dough, his breath warm on my neck as he explained fermentation times and hydration ratios. I introduced him to my friends, my sister, eventually my parents, who surprised me by being more accepting than I'd feared. My mum cried and apologised for not making me feel safe enough to tell her sooner. My dad shook Felix's hand and said, "Anyone who makes you smile like that is good in my book." I learned Felix's body slowly, carefully, with a lot of communication and patience and laughter when things got awkward. He was gentle with my inexperience, never making me feel rushed or pressured. Every touch felt like discovery, like I was learning a new language, and he was the most patient teacher. The first time we slept together, really slept together, I cried afterward from the overwhelming rightness of it, and he held me and told me he was falling in love with me. "I'm already there," I said. "I've been falling since the sourdough." We moved in together the following spring into a small house with a big kitchen and space for Felix to experiment with new recipes. I turned the spare room into my studio, and we fell into this easy domestic rhythm. Morning coffee while he prepped for the bakery, evenings cooking dinner together, weekends exploring the city or staying in bed embarrassingly late. Hemingway, who'd never liked anyone, immediately adored Felix and betrayed me by sleeping on his side of the bed. The bakery thrived. Felix eventually made me his official taste tester and unofficial marketing person, designing new logos and menus and social media content. I'd come in on Saturday mornings, and he'd have new things for me to try, watching my face anxiously as I took the first bite. The sourdough was still my favourite though, and he still made sure there was always one waiting for me, even now that I could have it any time I wanted. One Saturday morning, about a year and a half after that first real conversation, I came into the bakery to find it empty except for Felix. He'd hung a closed sign on the door, and there was a table set up with candles and flowers and 2 plates with slices of sourdough. I looked at him questioningly, and he came around the counter looking nervous in a way I hadn't seen since our first date. "Adrian," he started, then laughed at himself. I had a whole speech prepared and now I can't remember any of it. He took my hands in his, those strong baker's hands that I loved, that had touched me and held me and created beautiful things. "You walked into my bakery almost 2 years ago, and I knew immediately that you were going to change my life. I saved you bread because I didn't know how else to keep you coming back, how else to show you that there was a place for you here, with me, and you took a chance on me, on yourself, on us, even when it was scary and new." He got down on one knee, and my breath stopped. "I'm not good with words like you are, but I'm good at showing up every day and putting in the work and creating something that lasts. I want to do that with you. I want to save you bread every Saturday for the rest of our lives. I want to wake up next to you and teach you terrible baking puns and fight about whether the cat likes me more. I want everything, all of it, with you." He pulled out a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" I was crying, nodding, pulling him up to kiss him before he'd even finished the question. "Yes," I said against his mouth. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto my finger perfectly, and we stood there in the empty bakery holding each other while the morning light streamed through the windows and the smell of fresh bread surrounded us. That night, lying in bed with Felix's arm around me and Hemingway purring at our feet, I thought about fate and sourdough, and the way life surprises you. How sometimes you have to leave everything familiar to find yourself. How love can be patient and gentle and show up in the form of saved bread and quiet persistence. How the bravest thing I ever did was walk into a bakery and keep coming back, keep showing up until I was ready to reach for what I wanted. Felix pressed a kiss to my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured sleepily. "Just that I'm really glad you're a terrible businessman," I said. "Any good baker would have sold that last loaf instead of saving it for some random customer." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest into my back. "Best business decision I ever made. That loaf brought me you." We got married the following June in a small ceremony at the bakery before it opened, surrounded by the people we loved and the smell of fresh bread. Felix wore a flour-dusted apron over his suit because he'd been baking our wedding cake that morning. I couldn't stop smiling. My sister was my best person, and she cried through the entire ceremony. Felix's best friend Marcus, who'd apparently witnessed months of him pining over me in the kitchen, gave a speech about how insufferable Felix had been and how happy he was that I'd finally noticed. In my vows, I talked about sourdough and second chances and the courage it takes to become who you really are. Felix talked about patience and persistence and how sometimes love is just consistently showing up for someone until they're ready to let you in. We both cried. Everyone cried. It was perfect. Now, 3 years after I first walked into Crumb and Crust, I still go in every Saturday morning. Felix still saves me a sourdough loaf, even though we share a bed and a house and a life. It's become our thing, this small ritual that reminds us how we started. I walk in, he looks up and smiles that smile that's just for me, and hands me a brown paper bag with my bread. Sometimes he kisses me over the counter, sometimes we just exchange a look that holds everything we've built together. Last Saturday I walked in to find him training a new employee, showing her how to score the bread just right. He looked up when the bell chimed, and his whole face lit up. "There's my husband," he said to the new girl, gesturing at me with pride. "He's the reason I started making sourdough in the first place. Wanted to give him a reason to keep coming back." The girl looked confused. "But you're married now. Couldn't you just make it at home?" Felix caught my eye and grinned. "Where's the romance in that?" I took my bread, kissed my husband, and walked home through the morning sunshine feeling grateful for every choice that led me here. For moving across town and deciding to appreciate artisan bread. For being brave enough to ask why he saved me that loaf. For letting myself fall in love with a baker who saw something in me before I saw it in myself. Sometimes I think about that version of me from 3 years ago, lonely and confused and not quite fitting into the life I'd built. I wish I could tell him that it gets better. That the thing you're afraid of is actually the thing that will save you. That love will find you in a bakery on a Saturday morning, and it will be patient and kind and worth every moment of fear it took to reach for it. But mostly I'm just grateful. Grateful for Felix and his quiet persistence. Grateful for sourdough and second chances. Grateful that sometimes fate shows up exactly when you need it, wrapped in brown paper and smelling like home.